Hey everyone. So for today's lecture, we're going to be looking at urbanization, the growth of the modern city. In this period of industrialization, cities as we know them today become the large populated skyscraper landscape that you see with like modern day cities of New York and Chicago. So up until this period, most of Americans had lived in small towns, spread out, lived off agriculture, but that's going to change. Majority of people today live in cities, and this is where you really get this change in this period. So urbanization happens rapidly during this period. From 1880 to 1900, for every person that moved from the city to the countryside, 20 people moved to the city. So one person would leave the city, 20 more people would come. So the cities are growing greatly. In 1900, 90,366 people per square mile in New York City. New York City is the most densely populated city in the world at this point. And manufacturing and transportation hubs are growing rapidly. Remember industrialization, railroads. So the cities of New York, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh grow rapidly during this period. You also have massive corporations, massive companies growing in these cities who are employing thousands of people. So you have the International Harvester Company in Chicago, which employs 17,000 people. You have the meatpacking industry in Chicago. Remember, we read an excerpt from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle about the meatpacking industry in Chicago. But that meatpacking industry employed 25,000 workers. So while people were coming for work to have a new life or opportunity, there are also an array of problems that are occurring as so many people move to the city and the infrastructure tries to keep up. So one of the main problems is overcrowding. As I said, 20 people are moving for every one person leaving. So you're getting people living on top of people. You can see this depiction in these two pictures here. People are packed in very tightly all over the place. You have rampant poverty. As people move from working in fields, working in agriculture, to working for a wage, there's a lot of suffering that happens in that. A lot of people don't make enough money to live off of, so you have rampant poverty in these cities. As a result of overcrowding and poverty, you get slums. These are dilapidated, rundown houses that people live in by the dozen. People live on top of each other, and you can see the depiction here. These rundown, industrialized cities, the people living on top of each other. So in 1900, two-thirds of New York City's residents, 2.3 million people, lived in slums. What this meant was about 10 people in 20 square feet. That's not a lot at all. So people are living on top of each other. Also, these slums don't have running water. They lack bathrooms, electricity, or fire escapes. So with a disaster like a fire, people can't get out. We've seen this disaster before. So the problem is just the filth and the amount of people living in these slums. The squalor is really unprecedented. Here's a quote of what it was like in the slums. The street in front of the place was reeking with slops and garbage. The alleys and passageways were foul with excrements. The court was imperfectly paved, wet, and covered with domestic refuse. The privies, bathrooms, located in the close court between the rear and front houses, were dilapidated and gave off foul odors. The halls and apartments of the wretched occupants were close, unventilated, and clean. So you see just kind of the entire trash, the squalor that exists in these slums. Trash everywhere, human excrement, human feces. They don't have any running water. They're not cleaning things like we see today. So you can imagine the problems of that. These apartment buildings and slums were known as tenement housing. That's where these people are packed in really tight. This is what the apartments in the slums were referred to as. And you can see just how tight people live in both these pictures. If you look at that picture on the left there, you can see people's beds are in the kitchen. So they're living literally on top of each other. And of course, with that many people packed into such a small space, there's going to be crime. Cities today have crime. The difficulty is that there's no identification during this period. There's no social security numbers. There's no ID. So it's really hard to solve these crimes. So murders and robberies often go unsolved. As a result of all this squalor, all this filth, disease was rampant. Cholera, typhoid, typhus, and tuberculosis swept and killed the urban masses. When an outbreak happened, they really had no way of stopping it. People used slop pails. These were basically their bathrooms that they would fill up a pail in their house and just throw it in the streets. So you can think about the disease and the germs from that. In 1892, 6,000 New Yorkers died of tuberculosis. In 1918, 675,000 Americans died from Spanish influenza. This is the flu. It spreads quickly. You can just see the squalor there in the depiction there. That is a dead horse in the street, and the children are sitting there playing right next to it. So the water in the city is obviously unclean from everything that's happening. So if you look in 1880, there's 150,000 horses in New York City. 15,000 of them died and had to be removed that year. So you have horses dying in the streets, having to be taken out. As a result of so many horses, you have 3 million pounds of manure and 40,000 gallons of urine each day entering the streets. So you can see here a depiction of a giant mountain of poop, of horse excrement that they would have to clean up from the streets and put it there. So you can think of the smell, the squalor, just the filth of this. So one of the new jobs and one of the jobs in these cities was what's known as the night soil men. The night soil men were the men who carted the human excrement to the river every night. So people would dump it in the streets, dump it out, and they would come and cart it off the streets, scoop it up, put it in a cart, take it to the river, and dump it in the river. So obviously modern sanitation is not part of this. And here's a quote from what it was like. Every rainstorm calls miniature and loathsome Niagara of night soil. So remember, human excrement. That cascading sewage flowed right down the street, and by the window, that's a man sitting on a chair would not have only the odor, but also the view of this loathsome matter circulating at his feet. So just think about how disgusting that is. You can see the picture there of the man. Yeah, he's standing in poo, standing in human excrement in the streets of New York. It's disgusting. The problem is there's not enough green spaces. There aren't city parks, there aren't areas, so you can see kids playing in the streets, playing inside. And to make matters worse, you have poor roads and transportation systems. You have horse-drawn buggies on dirt roads that obviously you can see in these pictures get muddy, get filthy, make it hard to travel, especially with snow and rain. So obviously we don't live like this today. So what were the solutions? How do we all get to live together in the cities? One of the major things is the development of public transportation systems, such as the subway and elevated trains. As you see here, you see the train stations. So people are no longer having carriages as much. You don't see cars as much in the city. You have public transportation. The development of streets and tunnels. Streets are paved or cobbled, as you see with the brick there. It makes it easier to travel back and forth. It's less dirt, less filth. And also you have tunnels for subways and other things that you travel underground on the subway, so you're not disturbing the street above. You have the development of larger elevated walkways and bridges, and the reason that they can do this is development of steel and concrete industries. You can build these big things, so it's easier to get to and from New York City, but it's also easier to move around cities with elevated walkways like this. You're not all stuck in the streets where there's carriages and streetcars running around. You're able to walk above it. So again, public transportation helps out, makes it easier to get around the city. So you have streetcars being developed, trolleys, and subways. What this means is you don't have as many horses. So you don't have the horse excrement, you don't have the manure, things like that. But it's also easier for people to move around the city. You're not relying on carriages, easier to get to and from places. There's also the development of better sanitation methods. You have trash collection that's beginning. People are coming and taking the trash and taking it out of New York City, taking it out of the cities. You have development of technologies such as street cleaning. So you're cleaning off the streets with water here and brushing it down, so it's not as dirty as it was. You have the development of drainage systems and sewage systems. So the water in the city, the sewage in the city is being taken and dumped. As you see here, I'm not sure what these people are doing. There's the development of water towers so that there's fresh water that can come to the city. So it's not just stagnant, it's not coming from the river. There's also the development of water treatment plants. This is huge, where it's taking water out that comes from bathrooms, indoor plumbing, sewage is being treated for system and being released into the river so it's clean or used again. So there's treatment systems, there's water towers that are being used. You see here a picture of men looking at a water treatment system. You can think of them, think about it. I like it when the nastiness is down there and we're up here. They're separated. You're not living in it. It's not running down the streets anymore. Also the development of government services, so government sanitation services, public transportation, things like that, but also government services such as the police, because crime is rampant, also the fire department. Imagine fires are a big problem, so you get these modern services to try to help the people who are living in the cities. Other government services include ambulances, as you see here, the horse-drawn ambulance, to help people who are sick, take them to the hospital, get them out. You also have snow removal. You can see here the horse-drawn carriages removing snow from the city. But you have to think when snow melts other things, it would be a filthy situation. So these are government services to help out the citizens. There's also the development of high rises. So as steel is getting better, cheaper, concrete production is growing. The demand to live in the city is still there, but obviously you can't grow out from a lot of these cities. So what you do is grow up. That's why you see these high rises develop in cities such as New York. There's also the development of public parks, public spaces where people can go outside, be together, get back to nature a little bit. So that's what you see here, these pictures. So they're not just living in slums and squalor. It's really during this period that we see the development of a modern city, that we move from a city of excrement and horse-drawn carriages to the cities we see today. So here's the view from the Brooklyn Bridge in New York in 1906. In a lot of ways, New York looks very similar today. I mean, the buildings might look a little different, but the layout of the city looks very similar. You see the high-rise buildings, you see streets, you see the elevated subway cars. So you begin to see the layout of the modern city. And you get one of the big appeals of living in the city is the convenience. If you've ever been to a big city or anywhere, you know that you have a lot of different things to buy. You're living on a wage, but you have different restaurants, you have different goods you can buy throughout the city. So city life in a lot of ways is very convenient. So you get the modern convenience of shopping. People are opening up a lot of different stores, a lot of different goods, a lot of different food, a lot of different clothing. So you have the convenience of being able to shop for different things. You're not going to the same place, the same artisan every time. You're not eating the same foods. You're able to have a lot of variety, a lot of convenience. Fun becomes an important part of living in the city. You see parks, you see recreation, you see things like people riding camels in the city, you see fireworks. People are going out to do fun things. It's during this period that you see the growth of things such as traveling circuses or shows, things of this nature. And for a lot of those children lucky enough to not have to work, children get to have a childhood. They get to live in the city. They get to have things. You can see the girl on the right there with the camera with the doll. You see the kids on the left, they're sledding. They're getting to enjoy their childhood. Children are getting playtime. Again, for those who don't have to work in the factories, don't have to work, they're able to get out and play. They've got, able to buy tricycles, things like that, wheelbarrows, wagons like this. They're able to play in the city. You can see the two kids riding the bicycle there. The little girl's very excited. And you can see here the miniature train, attraction for kids. So it's a little steam powered train that goes around the tracks. You start to have extracurricular activities for children. You have what you see there is a knitting group there on the left, and then you have a child's play of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So you see the little kids dressed up like the dwarves. So they're putting on plays. They're doing things outside of just working and going to school. They're able to have a life to enjoy being a child. It's also during this period they see the development of major sports leagues. Um, in cities where major sports are still located, sports teams become entertainment. People go to baseball games. You can see a hockey team here. This is where you start to see development. Baseball becomes America's pastime. Everyone goes to the games. This is really where you see people live. That's kind of leisure. They have entertainment. You get the growth of amusement parks and vaudeville. Vaudeville are like plays that people put on. Like you see the comedy theater there, and amusement parks like Coney Island outside of New York City, roller coasters, things people go for entertainment to get away from the life in the city. And of course, as it is today, it's a faster paced life in the city of the development of the automobile. So people are literally moving faster. But life in the city is just faster. If you've ever been to a large city like New York or Chicago, it's vastly different than Roanoke, vastly different than outside of Roanoke, like Floyd, Virginia. Women's lives are also changing during this period. You can see the women playing tennis, having more time for leisure rather than being stuck in a house or the factory. You can see the women graduating from college, so they're able to get an education. You can see the picture here, the women learning to be typists in a classroom. So learning a profession, learning a job, and you can see a woman there working the operator board for the telephone company. So women are working to get jobs, to get better jobs than they had had to hopefully move up in society. During this period occurs what is known as the Great Migration. This is where African Americans began to move to cities in the Northeast and Midwest to escape life in the South. So you have to remember the Jim Crow laws in the South, the terrible treatment of African Americans in the South. So the growth of cities offers opportunity. So you see the growth of African American populations in places such as St. Louis, Chicago, New York City. Um, these areas grow in what known as the Great Migration. This would actually continue through the end of World War II as African Americans move out of the South. As with other people, African Americans are finding new roles in the cities. They're finding new jobs. They're not sharecroppers. They're working as barbers, you see there, washing people's clothes, finding opportunity outside of the South in the cities. But of course, one of the downsides, as we've talked about, is that life becomes more complicated as part of the city, becomes more regimented, becomes more structured. You have a lot more going on. You're living in, busy streets, crowded schools, really structured, complicated lives. This is really where you begin the daily grind. You show up, punch the clock, sit at a desk, work for 8 hours, punch the clock when you leave, do it every day. So this is where you get the modern idea of like capitalism of working for a wage, living in the city. Some of the frustrations of modern day life it could be traffic lights, speed limits, line at the checkout counter. You're always waiting, it seems like. There's too much to do, but never enough time. You're all so structured. You're always running around, feeling like you're always behind. And the fact that when you're in a city, everyone is a stranger. If you've ever been in a city, no one looks each other in the eyes. Nowadays, everyone has ear pods in, walking by each other. So you live in a world of strangers. But cities throughout the world have continued to grow throughout the 20th century, and they will continue to grow through the 21st century. People want to live in cities. That's where the action is. That's where money is made. That's where the fun is. So this is really the period where we see the growth of that modern urban environment.